Hi, Ben here with Visual Dev FM, and I wanted to build a blog. This is the series we're talking about and we're covering right now. And so this is building a blog with Webflow, part one. And typically, when I design something, what I like to do is I like to start in Figma, and I like to design in Figma, and then get all my designs worked out, and really go through everything um, and kind of get everything ironed out. But in this series, since we're showing you how to build a blog from scratch, I didn't want to do that. WordPress has these themes they release every year. This year's is 2019, last year's 2018, 2017, so on and so forth. And what they are is the really basic templates that you can use. They look great, but I wanted to just show you how we could build a blog with Webflow and kind of start from scratch and kind of do the same sort of thing. Let's get a simple, clean layout going. And I wanted to show you how quick we could do this. So let's get started. I have an empty project. I stuck a div block in here, but I'm going to remove that. So brand new project. And then what I would like to do is get started from the beginning. So we're going to just build instead of starting with how we look at what it looks like in the design, what I want to start with is the content. So let's start by creating collections, because collections are what's going to power and run our blog. So this is essentially the database, the piece that's going to hold everything together for us. So I'm going to come over here to the CMS collections, and I'm going to create my first collection. Okay, so it brings this up, which is great. And then what I want to do here is I'm just going to, I think the natural inclination would be, hey, let's create the blog post first. But anytime you're working with Webflow and you're designing and you don't have your content in yet, it's good to start with the supporting collections first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with categories, because we'll need blog categories like you would with any blog. So I'm going to click categories. Webflow is amazing, already has everything set up for me. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to say, okay, great, let's create the collection. So created, now I have categories. Now what I want to do, and this is one of the powers of Webflow, if I don't have my data yet, I just want to add 10 dummy items. So let's add 10 categories real quick. Okay, and when I created that, I used the presets for categories from Webflow. So you see name, a description, an icon if I wanted it, color, so on. So I'm going to stick with that. Now I'm going to create another collection, and I want to call this one, I want to get this one, and I want to make it authors. So you see I have a chance to customize this down here, but name, slug, bio summary, picture, email, Twitter profile link, Facebook profile link, and I can add fields here, but I'm just going to keep this, and I'm going to create this collection. Now I'm going to add 5 dummy items here. So I have categories and authors. Awesome. Okay. So now it's time for the main event. Let's add our blog posts. So I'm going to click up here one more time. I'm going to click on blog posts. It's got these fields here, but now I want to add supporting field collections or reference collections. So I'm going to click plus here, and I'm going to say add a single reference field, and I'm going to call this author. So who authored the piece, and I'm going to connect that to the authors collection. I'm going to save that field. Then I'm going to do this again. I'm going to add another collection, except this time, or add another field, but I'm going to make this multi-reference. I'm going to call this categories. And then I'm going to attach that to categories and save. So now I have the defaults, and I have those categories and author attached. So I can create this, and then I'm going to add 20 dummy items just to play with here. Perfect. So now I have 20 blog posts, and you'll see all the content, added an author, and even categories here are added in. So that's why we add those first, so that way we don't create blog posts and then create these other two and then have to go back and on our dummy content, select authors, add in categories. We do all that right up front. Okay, so we have that. I'm going to close this out. Now let's get started with design. We want to do something pretty simple. So I'm going to start with just the navbar element. And so to add that, I used Command K, which is the quick find. You can search for anything you want, div, tabs. I searched for nav, and I just inserted that. You can also see it shows me what's on page. So navbar, nav menu, and my nav links, and it's highlighting them over here. They're on page, so if I wanted to select those, I can. So the very first thing is I don't like to use the stock container because I don't like the width on it. So I'm going to select the navbar and I'm going to put in a div. Just going to drop it in here. And then I'm going to give it a class and I'm going to call it container. So called it container. I'm going to say the max width is 1200 pixels. And then I'm going to give it some padding in case it goes to the edge of the screen, like maybe 15 pixels on each side. So I'm just clicking and dragging here on the paddings. You can option click and do both sides, set both sides at the same time. So got my padding set, okay? And then I just move all this content over. So I'm going to drag the brand in there, and I'm going to drag the nav menu in here, and then the menu button, which is for mobile. Make sure they all end up in there. Then I'm just going to delete the original container. So now I have the same setup as before, but it's just a little wider than the standard Webflow container. So have a nav in here. We'll just put like a heading since we don't have a logo. I'm just going to call this brand heading. And then I'm going to take change the top margin here. And I am going to select a font. Just something to work with here. I'm going to go, this works for me. Okay. So we'll just call this log. And then I might want to change the height there. Okay, so I've got this, and then really honestly what I typically do before I start any project is I try to do my styling real quick. So let's talk about that. So let's come over here and let's create a new page, and let's call it styles. And then what I like to do with it is I like to click on this cogwheel and I like to set it to save as draft because I don't want it to be published. I don't want people to see it. Maybe I'll publish it later and password protect it, but and then I typically put in a section. I'm going to put in a div. So I'm getting those from the quick find, but you could also just pull those over here if you wanted a section, and then I put in a div. And then what I'm going to do is call that div my container. Perfect. And then I'm going to add in headings. And then I'm also going to select my body here, and I'm going to come over here to the selector instead of giving it a class. I'm going to say body all pages. And I was using Inconsolata. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so font nerds or font people correct me, please. But I use that for my headings, so I think for my body, I'm going to use something different here, and we'll just go with Lato. So choose that, and so all my font is going to be this font. Now I won't have to set it on every single element that I drag in. It just means the body is automatically going to be set to that font. Instead of line height of pixels, I'm going to go unitless and just 1.5. And then I like my font a little bigger, so I'm going to say 16. These colors are fine. That works. Okay. And so now you'll notice when I put in a paragraph, it automatically has all that, all those settings, Lato, 16, 1.5. This is color. So I can still style all paragraphs to be different, or I can style a specific paragraph, but just getting the default out of the way. Okay. So I'm going to do the same with headings. I'm going to C. I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to paste it. Okay. And then when you click on a heading in Webflow, you can set, whether it's H1, H2, H3. So I'm just going to come through here, H4, H5, H6. So I'm going to set this. I'm going to come over here, and instead of giving it a class name, I'm going to say all my H1 headings. And I'm going to use this font I used earlier. I'm going to keep unitless just for now. Keep that the same. And so now I've got all my H1 headings are going to look this way. I won't have to style those. It's just done, right? And then I'm going to do the same thing here. All H2 headings. And go unitless. Okay. Same thing, all H3 headings. I know this is the boring part, but all H4 headings. I want you to know how this works. So as you build your blog, you can get all these things set. So I'm going to do the same thing, all H5 headings. Set my font. And lastly but not least, well, it is the least because it's the smallest. I don't know. Set my font and change my size. Okay. Boom. All right, so I have my headings, and next I typically add paragraphs in if you want. You can do all kinds of things. You can do lists. So I can insert a list, and I can say, you know, all list items. I want a little extra space around those. You know, you can do also in here. You could insert, you know, a block quote, and you could style that all block quotes. You know, how do you want those to look? I mean, you can just look over here at the add panel. What else do you want to style? Headings. We have text. Oh, we probably want to style our links. So if we put in a link, we can say we want all links to be what color, right? So I'm going to come in here and choose a color. I like blue, so I'm going to work off of this color blue here. I'm just going to hit the plus button and save this, create it, so I can reuse it. But now my links are going to be this color, and then I can say, you know, on hover, I don't want that text decoration of underline, and now, you know, I have my link style. Every link's going to look that way unless I say otherwise. And we can come over here and just choose all these different, you know, I can style my buttons. And so buttons are kind of different. So let's grab a button. And I'm going to put it up here. I don't have an all buttons styling. So what I like to do is just say, this is my button. I'm just going to, you know, create a class called button. And then maybe I want to use the same font as I'm using for my headings. And then I can set my color of, on my font. I can set my background color. And then maybe on hover, I want a darker version of this blue. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that. So now I have that on hover. So now I have a button. And anytime I put in a button, I can just add the class button. And I'm going to have the style that I want. Okay. So, and you could, you know, add other elements in. I like to do all these different things. So you can do rich text, links, you know, text blocks, block quotes. You can style what if you want all of your images. Like if you want to be able to give a class and you want to like round the corners of your images, you can do that sort of thing. You know, you can put in a tabs element and style it, and then that way you can copy and paste it and use it over and over and over again. So sky's the limit. You can do a lot of things, but now that we have our basic style set, let's jump back into the home page. So we have a nav bar. So I'm going to make this nav bar, I'm just going to say a very light white. And I'm going to save this as a color as well. And then my font, my brand color, let's just make that the color in this. Let's set it to be blue. And then I'm just going to set the links here. We'll call these nav links. Okay. So now that I have those set, I could change the font here as well. I'm going to make it match my heading font, and then I can change the colors. So I can make it blue or maybe this darker blue. So I'm going to have that to be blue here, and then maybe on hover, I want the background to be like that dark blue and this to be that white. So now I've got my menu, and you see it's pushed over to the side. So what I want to do is on my container, I'm going to click this little button, which is going to set margin auto. So now it's centered. So there we go, blog, and I've got a menu. Okay, so this is perfect. We're off to a good start. Now it's time to show you the power of Webflow. So we can put in a section, and we could do a lot of different things, but I'm just going to call this blog section 1. So one of the things that I see, and I'm going to put in a div here. Okay. And then this blog section, I'm just going to add some padding. The top and bottom. And then on this, I'm going to call it container. Okay. And it collapses because I don't have a height set on it, but I have a width. But we're just going to keep it selected and jump in here and grab a collection list. And let's get started. Let's tie it to blog posts. So there are a lot of different ways to style this. So one really popular way is to use a grid. So I'm just going to select my grid here, my collection, and then the list wrapper, I'm going to set this to grid. On my collection list, I'm going to set the display to grid. And then I can edit this grid, and I'm going to go, 3 columns. So now you see it has all of my posts laid out here. And so I can start in here by putting in a heading in here, and then I'm going to set it as heading 2, so you see it applies to all of these. And I'm going to get my text from the name of the post. Okay, great. And in fact, I want to customize this, so I'm going to call this, blog grid heading. And so we're going to take this, and I'm going to dial down the size a little bit, bring it down. So let's say 20. That's fine. Okay. And so I've got that. And then, in a card, typically there's an image. So I'm just going to say div, put in a div block so you can type with a quick find, or you can come over here and just click on div. It's going to insert it wherever. If we had this selected, we'll insert it right below, or if that was a div, it would have put it inside, nested it. So I'm going to call this blog image. So now we have a blog image. I'm going to give it a minimum height of 200. It's probably a little tall. So maybe like 160 or 180. That's good. And then I'm going to add a background image. And then I'm going to set it to cover and center. So now it covers this. And then what I want to do is I want to go to settings, and I want to get this background image from the thumbnail image for the post. So you see now for each post, I have the blog title and the image. So off to a pretty great start so far. And it's pretty easy. So another thing in here, I'm going to select the item, and I'm just going to hit the plus. I'm going to throw in a paragraph, and I'm going to get this text from the post summary. So it's like a short description of what the blog post is about. So got that. And then, typically we want to add in a button. So we can grab this, and we already styled this luckily, so we can just type in button here and select our button, and then what we're going to say is, read post. We'll edit that just by double clicking. And then if we click it and come over here, select this, we can click on this purple collection page, and we can say link to the current post. So now that we've clicked on that, that's going to take us to the current blog post that we're hovering over. So, and then, other things that typically happen here, I'm just going to put in a div. And I'm going to put in a text block. So let's put in, actually I'll do a text link for, I'll do a text block, and I'll say written by. And then I'm also going to put in a text link. And I'll say I want to get this text from, drag this up so we can see it, the author name. So now we know who wrote it, which is awesome. So got names, and then I'm going to copy this and paste it again, and we might say, you know, posted on when was it posted, and so we can come in here and add another text block, and we'll get text from this, and we'll say do published on. So when was it published? So we'll get the date here, and we haven't published yet, so I'm going to say created on so we can see it. We haven't published our site yet, so these haven't been published. So now we have a date. I know you're saying this looks terrible, Ben. Promise we're going to get there, but I just wanted to see how quickly we can lay this out. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I want to do something to try to make this a little sharper. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put in a div block, and I'm going to drag that in, drop that in, and then I'm going to bring it up here with my heading. Let's drop this heading in here. Because one of the first things that I see is that these different length and titles is messing with my layout. So what I'm going to do is just wrap it in a div, and I'm going to call it blog title wrapper. And then I'm going to give it a minimum height of 120 pixels. That's way too tall. Terrible guess, Ben. Okay, and then what we want to do is just set this so it's tall enough that we don't have any of those layout issues. Okay, so now that we got a minimum height, what I want to do is set it as flex as well, and then I want to align it center so that these are kind of centered in here, which is awesome. So minimum height 80, and then we might need to pump this up. So I'm going to say 100 here just to make sure everything fits. So now these are kind of centered, and I don't know if that looks great, so I'm actually going to come back and say align these to the top so they all have the same. Okay, now we're cooking. Okay, so we have our title. This looks pretty good, so I'm just going to put some margin on the bottom of it to get that descriptor off. And then next I'm going to give this paragraph a class, and I'm going to call it blog summary text. All right, so now that we have blog summary text, let's just make this a little smaller. So let's make this 14, and so just a little more compressed here. And then down here, this is a mess. So let's call this, I'll call this blog details wrapper. This div that's wrapping everything. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say flex this so that it's all kind of set out there. But then I want the font size to be much smaller. So, all right, 12 maybe, even 10, 11. It might be too small. And then on my wrapper here, I'm going to put a little space at the bottom. And then you'll notice that this text doesn't look the greatest. So what I'm going to call is I'm going to call it blog detail text. And I'm just going to give it a margin on the right side of 5. Is that too much? That's probably a little much. Okay, let's call it 3. So I'm going to say this same thing, blog details text. Blog details text. I'm going to give this to all of these except this last one, which is last one. Okay, written by this person, posted on. And then we might want like a little breaker here, so I'm going to copy and paste this so I have it twice. And right here, I'm going to just use Option 8 on my Mac to put in a bullet. So just to break that up, or if you didn't want a bullet, you could, you know, / or something like that. Or maybe you could, you know, pipe there, just something separating it so that, you know, we break it up a little bit. And then on this one, you might say wrap, just so if they do get, you know, does get too long, it will wrap over to the next line. So just something to keep in mind. So keep that text there just like that. And then, you know, you might stylize this a little bit, add a little padding on here. And typically I'm going off a design, but since we're just kind of playing here, I'm going to choose black and just change the opacity here. So what I'm doing is putting an outline on this blog detail text. Just messing with the opacity here, just to kind of break things up. And then maybe, since this is a grid and everything else kind of stretches out, what I could do is I could come here to my button and I could say, okay, let's call this grid blog button. We'll give it a combo class. And then what we'll do is we'll just take this and we'll say give it a width of 100%. So it stretches all the way across, and we'll center that. So now when we preview it, you know, we've got our grid here, which, you know, honestly looks pretty darn good. And that is just, you know, once again, with just a few minutes of playing with it. Now we could, you know, just make some different adjustments here if we wanted. I'm just going to I'll let this go. But so we have a grid, and that was really quick. You see this a lot with blogs. You know, a grid layout of cards maybe, and you could do a lot of different things here still. So you know, could really style this. We could wrap all of this and give it a padding and make it, you know, more card-like with an outline. You know, you could really go to town. But I wanted to show you quickly how you could build this. Now, typically when you're building with WordPress or what have you, you don't really, I mean, it's whatever the theme is in. Like they've got a grid layout, you have a grid layout, right? So so that's one thing that you're stuck with. But with Webflow, you can kind of do things your own way. So I want to show you this real quick. So if I go up to my collection list and I go to settings, I can limit the items. So maybe I'm going to start at 1, and I'm just going to show the first 9 posts. Or maybe I just want to show the first 6 posts. And if I was writing this blog, I'd probably try to make some of my descriptions match it. In fact, one thing that you can do in here is in your settings for blog posts, on the post summary, you can do a maximum character count. So you can say, I don't want anything over, we go the old school Twitter, 140 characters. So if you're trying to make sure content, you know, lines up the way that you want it, then, you know, you can do that as well. So here's a blog with a grid. Now, here's where Webflow gets really, really cool. So I'm going to copy this section, and I'm going to select my body, I'm going to paste it in, and I'm going to click on this section, and up here at the top, I can take this class, and I can click on this down arrow, and I can say duplicate the class, and I'm just going to call this blog section 2. Now what's really neat here is I can take this collection list, and I'm going to duplicate this class. I'm going to call it collection list 2. And then instead of making it grid, I can go back to display block. So now this one already looks a little different, right? And so, you know, if I want a different look for my blog than just grid, I can do that too. So let's look at another way to lay this out. So one thing that we could do is come in here to container, and we could put a div in here. And then we'll drop this collection list into the div. And then I'm going to call this blog to wrapper. Okay. And then I'm going to drop in a div, and then I'm going to drop in another div. So I have 2 divs in here. I'm going to move my collection list into this first div. And then what I'm going to do is set this blog to wrapper to display flex for me. And then this one I'm going to call blog to left. And I'm going to give it a width of 65%. And then I'm going to call this one blog to right. And I'm going to give it a width of 35%. So now I have a 2-column layout for a blog. And I have grid. And I have this 2-column layout. And maybe, over here, I could just put a little padding on this right side, and I could throw a div in here. And then I could come in here and put in a heading, a paragraph, and you could put whatever you want here, right? Social media widgets and all kinds of content. But the real power of Webflow is that you're not locked into one layout. You can choose a layout that works best for the content that you have, right? And so maybe on this one, since I've got, it's stacked, I'm going to call this collection item. I'm going to say, typical item, because this is what a typical blog looks like, or the old school blog. I'm going to put some padding or some margin at the bottom, and then put this padding up here as well. And then I could give it, an outline here at the bottom where it's, we get like a bar that separates each post. And you could change these widths or the percentages, if this feels a little stretched. And you could even come in here and we could say, we could duplicate this class and call it blog image 2. And maybe our minimum height, since it's stretched out, is we want this to be a little taller, right? So maybe you have some really cool images. And then on the blog title wrapper, we no longer need a minimum height. And we can set this back to block, right, which messes up these. So let's go back. What happened? Well, I changed this, but I didn't. So I would call this blog title wrapper 2. And then I would set it to block so it doesn't mess with this one up here, right? And then I could also remove that minimum height from that. So, so let's go back. What did I do? I renamed it instead of duplicating it. So what I want to do is blog title wrapper. I renamed it. I want to duplicate it. Blog title wrapper 2. There we go. And then I'm going to set this to block. Take the minimum height off. So now I've got a blog that looks like a blog section that looks like this, which is, like I said, more typical for a blog. The other cool thing that with the power of Webflow, not that you would have these same layouts on the same page, I just want to show you how you could flex and do a whole bunch of different things with your blog. Let's say that maybe I'm going to copy this section and I'm going to paste it in, and maybe you're a photographer. Let's duplicate this class and let's call it blog section 3. Okay, and so let's go back in here, and I'm going to take this collection list and I'm just going to pull it all the way back out to the top level, and I'm going to get rid of this previous item. So now I'm back to a collection list, and then I'm going to duplicate this class. I'm going to call it collection list 3. Maybe you're a photographer and it's all about the images for you. So maybe you don't want a title, and maybe you don't want all the details, and maybe you don't need even the summary, right? So you kind of have these images, and maybe even we don't need a button, because what we could do is we could insert a link block and put this blog image inside of here, and then I'm just going to remove this class. And then my link block, I'm going to say the width is 100%. Okay, and I've got my blog image in here, and then my collection list 3, let's just set it back to a grid. And so now I'm done with this, and you can see, oh my gosh, I've got a card layout, I've got a typical blog layout, and then I've got images layout. So, maybe it's a portfolio, maybe it's you're a photographer, maybe I don't know how you want to blog and how you want to tie things together, but you can see now I have all these different options, okay? And so this is the power that Webflow brings. And I wanted to quickly show you how you can do this. So we've styled everything on the desktop. Let's go down to the tablet level. And so on a tablet, blog section 1, let's make all these responsive. So on a tablet, I'm going to edit the grid, and I'm going to delete this column because it's all auto here. And now it's 2 columns on a tablet. And then on phones, portrait, that's okay. I can keep 2 columns, or landscape. But on portrait, I want to edit this, and I want to delete this column. Okay, done. And so now I have a single column. Looks really good, right? Okay, so let's jump back up to the desktop. See, it still looks good there. We can go to our next collection list. And on this collection list, we can, because we're set here, we've got a wrapper, and then what we've done is on the blog to wrapper, we set flex. So once again on tablet, I'm okay with 2 columns. Here, not so much. So what we could do is we could change this from a horizontal where they lay out next to each other to vertical where they stack. And then what we would do is make the blog to left 100% so it stretches. And then the blog to right, we'd make this 100%. So now this content is stacked on top of each other. And you'll notice that we gave this a padding, so we can just remove that padding here. And then now we have that set up. And then when we jump down to this view, the mobile portrait, in fact, these look really similar, right? And so we can jump back up, and we can go to the images, and it's the same thing. We can come down here let's go to our tablet view. Maybe 3 is okay, but we just don't want it to be so tall. We want it to have more of that square feel. So we change those heights there. And then we could jump down to this one, and maybe on collection list 3, we want to delete this column down here on the landscape. Then we go to portrait. Once again, you could change the height here, but what I'd like to do is just come back to the grid, and let's delete the column. Boom. And so now this looks great on phone. Looks great on landscape version of phone. I jump up. Looks good on tablet, desktop. Looks good on the desktop. And so now I have 3 different kinds of layouts. And we haven't even been at this for an hour, right? And we spent a lot of time styling and setting up content. So you can see where Webflow really brings a lot of power that maybe we don't have with WordPress, where we can't move things and place things the way we want them. So now that we have this, what I'm going to do, Webflow has the ability, if I take this navbar, I can right click on it and I can create a symbol. So a symbol, I'm just going to call this nav, is something that I can reuse. It'll be the same on every page. So that means I just edit it once, and then everywhere that it's placed, it takes those same settings or behaviors. So what happens in Webflow is we come in here to the blog post template. It's blank. And what I can do is I can come over here to the add panel, and I can add a symbol, and I'm going to add in my navbar. Then I'm going to add in a section. Okay. I'm going to call this blog content section. And then I'm going to add in my container. So the container just kind of keeps everything together. I'm going to use my custom container. And then what I like to do with the blog, you can do whatever you like. I'm going to put in the container here. Now I'm going to put in another div. And I'm going to call this blog wrapper. And then I'm going to put in my rich text element. So rich text is what the blog content connects to. So I can say get the text from my post body. So, and then up here I can switch between all the posts. So I can get different content. But what I like to do is on my blog wrapper, it's all about readability. And I have this set to max out at 1200 pixels wide. But I mean, trying to read this is not comfortable at all. So, maybe I'm going to change this and set the blog wrapper to 60%. And then I'm going to center it. So now it feels a little more comfortable. And then another thing I can do is I can come in here to my body, and I'm going to add in another section. And I'm going to move it up above my blog content section. I'm just going to call this my title bar. And I'm going to give it a background color of my blue. I'm going to put in, once again, a div. And I'm going to call it container. And then I'm going to put in a heading. And on my title bar, I'm just going to give some padding here. And then on my heading, I'm just going to say blog title, give it a class. And I'm going to take this and make it match the bottom, so it's 10 on top, 10 on bottom. I can make the color of this right here. So then what I want to do is I want to get this text from the name of the post. So there's the name of my post. My blog content section, I'm going to put some padding on this so it's not all run together. And so now, very quickly, I have a blog page, a detail page, where people can come and read my blog. So if I go back home, in fact, I'm just going to set this link. So by clicking it into double-click in the symbol, click my link, I'm going to choose my page, I'm going to go home. And then now when I preview, if I click home, it takes me back home. And then this post, it's set to go to the current blog post. All these buttons are. So now when I preview this, people see the previews, they click the button, they're taken to my post, which is pretty easy, right? So now we need to make this responsive. So that title is a little large for this level, or this tablet, so I'm just going to drop that down. And this looks good. This looks a little narrow, so I'm going to maybe make this 80%. And then when I jump down here, it might make the text a little smaller one more time. And then I'm going to take my blog wrapper. It's at 80. I'm going to take it up to, maybe 95. So really quickly, and the way Webflow works is you always want to start by styling the desktop version first and then working your way down. Okay, so desktop version first and then working our way down. So now we have a few blog layouts. We have this blog page. And then, there are other things that we might want to put here. So in the blog wrapper, I'm just going to put in a div. And since we referenced the author and we used that content on the other page, I'm going to call this author info. Or N4, since I can't spell. Let me rename that, take the R off. Okay, so I'm going to put some padding on this. In fact, if you hold down Shift and Option or Shift and Command, then you can set the padding on all four sides at the same time. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a background color, and I'm just going to make it this light gray, this off-white. And then I'm going to put in a div, and I'm going to call this author image. Actually, I'm going to rename this class and call it author left. And then I'm going to drop another div in here, and I'm going to call this author right. So author left, author right. I'm going to take this author info and set it to flexbox. And then I'm going to set this to like 30%, the left. And I'm going to make the right one 70%. Okay, and on the left side, I'm just going to put in a div, and I'll call this author image. And then what I'm going to do is give it a minimum height. Actually, I'll give it a minimum height of 200. And I'm going to repeat, and that's too tall. Just going to make this a little shorter, 160 maybe. And then I'm going to repeat the process here. I'm going to click on the background image, choose to cover. I'm going to center it. And then I'm going to come to settings, and I'm going to get the background image from the author picture. So now I have a picture of the author, and then on the author right, I'm going to put padding again so my content doesn't touch the image. I'm just going to put in some padding. And then I'm going to put in a heading element. So maybe an H3 here. And then I'm going to get this content from, let's pull this up, from the author name. So now we know who it is. And then I'm also going to put in a paragraph. And I'm going to get this text from the author bio summary. So now I'm getting the content about that author. And I'm going to call this author summary. And then I'm going to take this font down a little bit smaller size. So maybe 12. And then I'm going to take the padding off the top here where it's not so much. So now they get to the bottom here. They see who the author is. And in fact, what I could do is I could put in more info here. So I'm going to actually set this back to display block, and I'm going to put in another div, and I will say author profile, and then I'm going to put the left and the right in here and set the author profile to flex. And then right here I'm going to put in some text block, and I'm going to put this up above the author profile. I'm going to center it and make it like really bold, put some margin on the bottom, and then I can give it a title and call it about the author. Okay, so about the author, and then also in this box I can put a button, and then I just really quickly give it a button, and then I can call this author button. I'm going to give it a, oh my gosh, if I could spell. Please don't make fun of my spelling. Okay, so I'm going to give this a margin up at the top. And I'm going to give it a width of 100%. I'm going to center this. And then we can say more posts by this author. So now I've got an author section, and I can click on this button and say, go to that author, the current author. So then we'll set up the author page in another video, but then they could click on the author page and see all the posts by Ellie. So we have that. The other thing that we'd probably want to do is we would come in here into the blog wrapper, and we want to add another div. So let's add another div. And then I would call this blog page details wrapper. It's probably way too much, but just kind of on the fly here. I should be naming better. I'm sorry. I'm going to give it some margin here, and then do the same thing. I had 25 as padding on here, so 25. And then what I want to do is I want to add a collection list. So I'm going to come in here and add a collection list. And then my source is going to be categories in here. So I want to list all the categories this belongs to. And then what I like to do is here, I'm going to call this my categories list. Give it a class. And then I'm going to, on the list, I'm going to set this as flex. And then I'm going to put in a text link. And so the text link, I'm going to link this to the category page so they can go see all the posts about that category. We're going to get the text from the category name. And then what I want to do is just set this to display block. Let's put some padding on the sides and padding on top here. And then on the collection categories list here where we're flex, we want to set this to wrap so that they kind of wrap over. And then we want to set it to center here. Okay. And then on my links, I'm going to set the font to that same white. I'm going to set the background to this blue. And we'll give them some margin on the bottom and around the sides. And then I don't want that to have an underline. So you'll notice I just started styling this without giving it a name, and it just called it link. Let's rename the class and call it category link. So now we've got a category link, okay? And so category links, we've got this wrapper, we've got the categories list, and this is every category. And we can come over here and set this, go to current category. And so now we see the categories, And then probably what I would want to do is, this is a little large, so just make this a little smaller. And then we can maybe want those to wrap over. I'm going to do this right here. Perfect. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll copy this text block, and we're going to put it up here in the blog details wrapper. And we're just going to select it. It's right here. And drag it up top, and we'll say posted in, or you could say categories or tags or whatever. And so now if they click on these, it'll go to that category, or they can click on the author, see more about the author, or they have the blog post itself to read, or they can go home and read more. The other thing that you could do is, really quickly, I know we're pushing an hour and I've got more to do on this, but we're coming to a close on the first video here. So the other thing that I could do is I'm going to come in here and add another section. So I want to add a section. Oh, it yelled at me because I was trying to put a section in a section. So I'm going to say recommended. Oh, the dreaded recommended reading section. And I'm going to say it's just 35 pixels. Then I'm going to put in here, I'm going to put a div. And inside the div, I'm just going to, once again, container. And then what's really cool is I can come right over here to home. I've already styled some of these. I like this card layout. So I'm going to take this collection list wrapper, and I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go to my blog post template. And in recommended in the container, I'm going to paste it. So now I've got this blog list here. And you're saying, okay, more blog posts at the bottom. And I'm going to do a couple things. One, I'm going to limit it to just 3 items. So just 3 posts. And then I'm going to filter this. And I'm going to say categories contains any of the current categories of this same blog. And I'm going to save it. So now I'm going to see 3 other posts that are categorized the same way. And then I can come down and use the same title here in my container. And I'm just going to drop that up above. I can say, recommended posts. Or, more like this. Okay. And so now, very quickly, I have a blog page with categories and an author, recommended posts, and then on my homepage, I have a grid layout, a traditional layout, and then a portfolio photography layout. So we did all that in under an hour. And so I know it's not styled great. And at the end of this, I'm going to give away a clonable element that's got a lot of stuff like this with it. It's going to be styled a little bit better, and it'll be a little more consistent, but I'm going to have a bunch of different layouts. I'm going to have different layouts for your blog. I'm going to have team sections to list your team. I'm going to have, portfolio sections. It will have just a bunch of, if maybe you wanted to sell products at the end of a blog post, it'll have e-commerce pieces to it. So a lot of different pieces. We're going to pick back up. I have more blog posts coming. I just wanted to show you how you could build this. We've got more. Next week, I'm going to show you how to add in some other things. When we're done with this series, it's 3 parts. We'll give away that clonable Webflow project for you. So hopefully this video has helped. If you have any questions, let us know. And hopefully you're enjoying not only the podcast, but the resources that come with it. Thanks so much for listening and watching. We really appreciate you guys.